everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today, as we're talking about, we're in the unit of the law and you. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about juvenile law. And basically how law is different for kids than it is for adults. Cool stuff to talk about today. Let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so we're going to be talking about juvenile law today. Juvenile law can change pretty significantly from state to state. So I want to kind of give an overview. When in doubt, I'm going to kind of focus on North Carolina, which is where this is at. Also, disclaimer to this whole thing, because laws change often. This is being recorded in 2021. So all the facts and figures I have, to the best of my knowledge that I can ascertain, is accurate present day. So if something changes, 5 minutes after I'm done recording this, then it'll be inaccurate. But so just to clarify, this is 2021. So juvenile law in North Carolina. All right. So North Carolina law or juvenile law deals with kids. So I wanted to specifically talk about here at the start, why is there a different court system for kids than there are adults? Well, it makes sense if you're thinking of some, 65-year-old, man and some 4-year-old, that makes sense. But why is it different between somebody who's 15 years old and somebody who's 19 years old? Why is that? And we will talk about today how the different states kind of struggle with how they want to divide up juvenile versus their adult court system. But the reason there is a difference is because the human brain develops over time. So obviously, when you're a baby, you gradually get smarter. By the age of 5, here on this little chart I have, 5-year-olds are mastering language. By 6, they're seeing and hearing. Your brain is actually 90% developed by the time you are 5 years old. 90% developed. Your brain is not generally considered fully developed, though, until you're 25 years old. All right? So that extra 10% for those 20 years takes a long time to develop. So the reason that juvenile court systems exist is when you're a teenager, you do some crazy stuff that's not logical, and you can get yourself in a lot of trouble, and that can directly be contributed to the fact that your brain, my brain ever, it becomes fully developed, as in your ability to problem solve situations and your risk and reward sensors. These type of things, when you are 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, while you might know the difference in right and wrong, you may not process the severity of it. And it's understandable that people could commit a crime when they're 15, that when they're, a few years older, they're like, oh, what was I thinking? Like I wish I could go back in time and slap myself. And understanding that, because once you become an adult, all right, once you get in your 20s, you're going to look back on yourself when you're a teenager and be like, what in the world was I thinking? Even if you're a teenager right now and you're like, I'll never think that. And that's how you're supposed to think as a teenager. When you get a little older, you'll think back and be like, all right, self, I'm not going to admit to anybody else that was a dumb idea, because I said I knew everything, but yeah, we can all agree it's dumb. Because of that, there's a separate set of court systems for kids and juveniles than there are for adults. So there's a whole set of juvenile law. Let's start out here. The number one aspect of juvenile law is rehabilitation. All right. So while that is, yes, that's a concept with adults that get arrested and doing things and get sent to prison, is the idea of rehabilitate them. That is the end-all be-all goal for juvenile law. Rehabilitate, basically fix whatever issue has caused these kids, whether they're teenagers or younger, to make these decisions and help them grow and then release them back out into the wild, into the community, so it doesn't happen again. Yes, that's the same concept that we do with adults, but it is the primary focus is not let children ruin their lives because they make bad decisions when they were younger, and try to fix those decisions and the process they went through to get to those decisions as they move forward. So because of that, there is a lot of differences in juvenile law and adult prisons. Number one, they're called detention centers. They're not called jails or prisons. So the whole concept of having a prison for kids, they're called detention centers. They're holding them. And the focus is rehabilitation versus punishment. Kids make mistakes. Let's, while they're in the detention facility, let's rehabilitate them. So there's still school. There's still, trying to get them to grow as individuals, to understand the decisions you made to put you here is not the right track. Now, you may have in your brain, when I mentioned talking about brain development, 25 years old is scientifically when your brain, on average, is fully developed. And you're like, so you're saying a 23-year-old is a kid? No. All right, Mr. Wagstaff. So what is classified as a kid? Well, glad you asked, because it's complicated. Every state has to interpret it themselves over what that state believes is the appropriate age for somebody that commits a crime to be tried as an adult versus tried as a child. Because there's a big difference in the juvenile court system and the adult court system. So the age of criminal responsibility, or the majority, this is, you can see 18 is a lot of it, but California is at 16 years old. Florida is at 16 years old. Now, North Carolina, 18 years old. If you're under 18 years old, generally speaking, you'll be tried as a juvenile. Which is what this is. That is as of 2017. This is recorded in 2021, so 4 years ago, 2017, it was 16. If you committed a crime at 16 years old, you were tried as an adult. You got in a fight at school at 16 years old, you would be arrested and tried as an adult with assault. Not that that's different, we'll get there in a second. So there are situations where, a 16 or 17 year old, even though it's 18 years old, anybody under 18 years old goes to the juvenile court, there are still situations in which a child can be considered an adult. And it really comes down to the individual situation. And if it, like a murder trial, if a child murders another child, it's where it says age juvenile can be transferred to an adult court. If they're over the age of 13 and they're arrested for murder, they're going to be tried as an adult and be kept in the entire adult court system, which kind of gets a little tricky. All right, but the rule is in the court system, once you're considered an adult, you're always an adult. So you can't be like tried as an adult at 14 for something and convicted, and then like 3 years later, at 17 years old, considered a juvenile again. Once you're an adult, you're always an adult. These are some of the things, and the whole raise the age thing here was North Carolina trying to raise that age from 16 to 18. So the reason that is, of why they are raising the age to 18 years old, is number one, it is all about rehabilitating. The last thing you want to do is put a 16-year-old in prison and have them be a convicted felon, which follows them around on their record for the rest of their life. We're going to talk about here in a little bit how it is different as a juvenile, and that doesn't necessarily happen. Because, again, all adults, whether they'll admit it or not, can remember themselves doing something really dumb at 16 years old. That, like, oh, why did I do that at 16? Knowing that, maybe if we give the kids a little bit more time, up to 18, to basically be rehabilitated and put back into society. So this is, between the ages of 16 and 17, this is one of the reasons they're going to raise the age in North Carolina, while most states have it at 18, is most of the things that would get you tried in adult court at 16 and 17 years old, if the rule was anybody 16 and 17 was in an adult court. The vast majority are misdemeanors, like 80% are misdemeanors. Now, the fact of the first one here is cruelty to animals. There's a whole other hot button topic, and there's a situation where that's a felony. So let's just ignore that one because that's a whole nother topic. But like disorderly conduct, theft of cable television service. You stealing somebody else's Netflix account? No, that's a crime. You know, you could be arrested for that. You're like, wait, what? Yeah. So misdemeanors spanning about 80% of the criminal cases between to 16 and 17-year-olds are in that vicinity. Non-violent felonies are 16.3%. Basically, like perjury, lying under oath, larceny, which is like stealing stuff, breaking, entering into a motor vehicle, possession of over a certain amount of marijuana, depending on what state you are in. So these are non-violent felonies. All right. They'll put you in the system. Now, violent felonies, murder, rape, arson, assault with a deadly weapon, intent to kill, those at 3.3%, they're still being tried as an adult anyway, generally speaking. So most of these people can work their way out of it in their life and make better decisions. But it is still possible for somebody under the age 18 to be tried as an adult, and it really just comes down to is it a violent felony? Generally speaking, depending on the individual situation, a violent felony is going to be tried as an adult if they're over the age of 13, 14, 15 years old. But again, it all depends on the specific circumstances of that. So the question is, why can someone who is under 18 be tried as an adult? And so as you're answering that, pause me and we'll move on. All right, so how are juvenile cases handled in North Carolina? All right, couple of things here. Number one, a juvenile delinquent is called a juvenile delinquent, a child criminal. The juvenile delinquent is the term itself is used instead of convict or felon. So a juvenile delinquent is a kid who's breaking the law. The entire hope and belief system of the juvenile court system is rehabilitation. This is why, if you're 17, you're murdering people, you're tried as an adult, you might be past the rehabilitation stage at that point. So the goal is get these kids, try to figure out what the issue is, try to help them understand better decision making, put them back out into society, and hopefully they make better decisions from that point on. Now, getting data for this is actually pretty difficult. You got like large scale data, but there's not a lot of details here to really dig into this, and we'll explain why that is here in a few minutes. But so these are basically the recidivism, basically people who are in the juvenile court system that did time at the detention center or whatever, left, and then recommitted crimes again later on, all right, in their life. This looks pretty rough. I mean, if you look at the years like 2013, 14, 15, almost like 80% of people got arrested again. Man, we're not doing a good job. So yes, this graph here is meant to be a downer because the next one is much better. So yes, while it does seem to be a high percentage of people are reoffending afterwards, the amount of young people being arrested and convicted is going down, which is fantastic. Obviously, no crime is better than not having a second crime. So it's hard to tell with the previous graph what exactly was that showing. Are these violent criminals? And we're going to talk about why there's not a lot of data here to kind of figure out how that's going. But what we do know is the amount of felonies and misdemeanors and incarceration rate by youth, people that would be in the juvenile court system, has gone down substantially over the last 30 years. But again, the juvenile delinquents are treated differently in the court system, because the entire hope is rehabilitation as opposed to punishing them for their crimes. It is to try to do what is necessary to rehabilitate, to make sure that these things don't happen differently, and that is the entire focus of the juvenile detention center format. So the question is, how are juvenile delinquents treated differently than adult criminals? And we just talked about that a little bit. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're going to move on. All right, there are two types of cases that juvenile courts see. The first one, and this one hurts me deep in my soul, man, is juvenile neglect. All right, so the court system is divided into basically two halves. Juvenile neglect. Juvenile neglect is typically when a child is either being completely neglected, like left at home, being abused, a dangerous situation that they're like, people aren't feeding the child, they're abusive to the child, they're ignoring the child, which is putting the child in danger. The juvenile court system will step in and do what we believe as a society is best for the kid. So if a child is in a very dangerous situation, they will remove the child from that home and give them to a much safer home. Now, by saying that, like, oh, great, nice, move on. It is a very, very tough situation that the juvenile court system deals with, especially when you're removing a child from a home. That's traumatizing to the child. It's traumatizing to the parents for whatever the situation is. And it's just usually a traumatic event all around, because trying to do the right thing for kids is, not always the easiest thing to do. But this is kind of a list of, the juvenile neglect part of juvenile law, of the process of trying to save kids from a dangerous and unsafe home environment. But man, if you want your heart ripped out, sit around not that you can, because we're going to talk about that in a second. I was going to say, this is sit around a juvenile neglect court hearing and listen to it, and you can't. And you can't do it, and we're going to talk about that why in a second. So one half of juvenile law is juvenile neglect. The other half is juvenile delinquency. These are the kids who are committing crimes. Now, I did this as a joke, and I had to make sure I looked it up before I put it up here. This is a relatively famous meme. So in 2021, this young girl who had their picture taken when she was 5 is now 16 years old, so you can do math in that. I looked up this girl, if you've ever seen this picture, she didn't set this house on fire. This is just a house on her road that had caught on fire. Everybody's evacuated. Nobody was hurt. It was a controlled fire at the time, and she was just out there watching it, turned around and took. But it does look like she pretty proud of herself for burning this thing down. Anywho, juvenile delinquency is the other half. Basically, children, anybody under the age of 18 that is committing crimes, and the actual children themselves are in trouble, whereas child neglect is not getting the kid in trouble, it's trying to do what's best for the kids. In theory, both sides are trying to do what's best for the kids, whether it's the neglect and getting the kid in a safer environment, or juvenile delinquency, which is trying to rehabilitate the young kids to prevent these bad decisions that they had made to begin with. So the question here is, juvenile court has two jobs. What are they, and what do they do? And we just got done talking about that, so pause me, answer that in complete sentences, and we'll move on. All right, what's the differences between juveniles and adult justice? Let's talk about that. One of the number one things is there's no jury trials. There's no jury trials for kids. Now, the reason that is, the hope is, and this is the entire thought process, these young people will correct their ways and will never come back to the court system and won't commit any more crimes. That is the entire goal here. So the last thing you want is the community seeing little Billy here at 14 years old, threw rocks at his neighbor's car or whatever little Billy's doing at 14 years old, and then just assuming Billy is a criminal forever. All right, the court system wants to avoid that, so they don't have a jury. They don't need more people coming in from the outside to see this situation than need be. So unlike criminal trials, which are open to the public because it is part of our culture, for juvenile, it's very limited in court. So it's just the amount of people that need to be there that day. Like if you have a witness in one of these crimes, they only get to be there on the day they are giving their testimony. So there's no jury. The judge makes the decisions, and there's very limited amount of people in the court. So I have a little picture here, and there's very limited amount of people, and it's kind of a need to know basis. They don't want little Billy's business being put all over the place. And where I had said earlier, go sit at the juvenile court. Like I didn't know, it's closed to the public. You can't just go be like, I wonder what kid got in trouble today. It's not a thing that's going to happen. It is closed to the public specifically to try to prevent these kids in the court of public opinion of being considered a criminal for the rest of their life because they did something when they were a teenager. The identities of the juveniles are also kept secret. Even in like court dockets and stuff, they're referred to by an arbitrary number that associates them with the case. But it is aggressively kept a secret over who is in the court system, because they do not want everybody knowing about a child who made a mistake and is considered a criminal. To the point, there are no fingerprints taken. They don't even fingerprint them. They do not fingerprint juveniles in the juvenile court system. Not only do they not fingerprint them, there's no mugshots. They don't take pictures of juveniles in the court system. The reason they do all this, all right, is because if a child makes a mistake at 14 years old, 15 years old, and they go through the rehabilitation process, whatever the court deems necessary for that, when they get out, once they've completed whatever their requirements are, it is like expunged from their record. It is removed. It does not exist. Like poof, gone. Because the hope is that they have learned from their mistakes, because their brains had developed, they've done their rehabilitation, they understand what has happened, and it is forgotten about. All right. So if you're, spend time in a detention center as a juvenile, but when you get out and you've done your probation, done whatever you need to, from that point on, when you get a job and you fill out a background check, and are you a convicted felon? No, you're not, because it doesn't exist. None of that exists. They can run a background check on you and they can't find it at all. No matter what happens, you can be the president of the United States and they can dig all they want for, what did you do when you were 13? They're never going to find it. And the court system aggressively doesn't keep those records for that reason. They're not trying to ruin somebody's life while they're still a kid and still learning, impulse control and, the severity of right and wrong. But it's beneficial to society. If you tell a 13-year-old kid he is a criminal, and this is going to go with you for the rest of your life, all right? Well, if you tell somebody they're a criminal, guess what they start believing? That they're a criminal, and they're much more likely to continue criminal behavior. So by allowing kids to grow, learn from their mistakes, and then have their record expunged, it's beneficial to society because you're less likely to have that same person become a repeat offender. If you label people as criminals from the time they're kids, guess what you got? Criminals. Because people will believe the labels that you apply to them, especially at a young age. So that kind of brings us to the question here. Why are juveniles not fingerprinted and having their pictures taken? Why are they not identified? And how is this beneficial to society as a whole? So we just got done talking about that. Answer that in complete sentences. And that's as far as we're going to get today. See you guys tomorrow.